Very pleased to be joined on this episode of the Warning Podcast by the host of the David Pakman Show, David Pakman himself. This is The Warning. Today is the vice presidential debate. It is the last major event, contact, if you will, between the two sides before the final month of the campaign. We wait for the October surprise, whatever that may be. But until then, there's a lot of campaigning to do. David, welcome.
Thank you.
What are you looking for tonight as we get ready for this vice presidential debate?
Couple of things I'm interested in seeing tonight. Number one, as far as JD Vance goes, is he going to show up and kind of be the alternative to Trump in the sense of going towards policy, going away from personal attacks? Or is he going to join Trump in that kind of haphazard, brazen style that includes more recently saying Kamala Harris is mentally disabled, etc.? Like, in other words, does JD Vance want to show up and say, I am Trump plus one? Or if you don't like Trump's politics, I'll do the buttoned up policy discussion. That's one thing I'm interested in seeing. Number two, I expect that JD Vance will try to make his opposition to Harris Walz partially along the lines of we're against the elites, we're against these East Coast liberals, etc. And of course, Tim Walz is not that. And so I'm very curious whether Tim Walz, as the Midwestern, I know how to fix a clutch guy, is going to be able to repel that from JD Vance and actually show, listen, Vance is more of that than I am for sure. And so I'm interested in seeing that dynamic because they have a hammer. Vance has a hammer, which is we are not like these coastal elites. Tim Walz is not one of those coastal elites. So I'm interested to see kind of how that dynamic plays out.
When you think about this debate, do you think that JD Vance is going to come out hard on Walz's military record?
I think that that's very risky and that he almost certainly will not because, Rolling Stone has a piece out now about turns out JD lied about the poor upbringing. It was pretty middle class. There was substance abuse, but it was pretty middle class. JD Vance in his book describes his time in the military. He doesn't lie about having seen combat, but he describes it in relatively more dramatic terms than what he's more recently acknowledged. So I think there's risk to JD that gets turned around on him as well.
When you think about his liabilities, your Governor Walz coming into this debate, you are debating somebody who I think made one of the most astonishing concessions of my 30 years working in politics, which he says in an interview with Dana Bash, hey, it's okay if we make up the story about the Haitians eating the cats, eating the dogs in this town because the town was ignored by the national media. The town has a problem. Even though the lie is a lie and it's sensational, now the national media is focused on the town. How do you engage somebody who said that? What's the right approach into that if you are advising Walz or even from your perch just analyzing this tonight? What are you looking for there? That this is certainly going to be front and center in the debate tonight.
The first thing is I would go in, I sometimes get calls from people in my audience who say, you know, if Kamala Harris just said X or if Tim Walz just said Y, they'd have no retort. They'd be dead in the water. We've got them. And I always explain, you might think that, but they have a plan. You're not going to catch them off guard. So first of all, the approach from Vance is going to be when I talked about creating stories, I didn't mean I fabricate facts. What I mean is there's something happening that the media is not covering. And therefore, I'm going to create more interesting language or insist on talking about it so that media stories are created. It's splitting hairs, but his argument is going to be, I didn't make up the facts. I am creating a media story around something that's being ignored. Now, I don't believe that that comports with the facts, obviously, but he'll be prepared to splice hairs. I think for Walz, the key is to know exactly how to bring it up in the way that in the debate against Trump, Kamala Harris, she had her prepared moment about bored people leaving Trump's rallies. It was rehearsed. She knew she was going to do it. She had it in her pocket, and it was just about finding the right moment to do it. And it worked so well, it sent Trump for a loop, wildly triggering him, and he never recovered in the debate. For Walz, it's knowing that Vance is going to be ready to split hairs in this way about creating stories doesn't mean you make up the facts. It means you force the corporate media to be accountable or whatever. He needs to know the exact right. I mean, I would be rehearsing exactly how to bring it up and to make a point of you can't believe anything this guy says. He went on national TV and with a straight face looked at Dana Bash and said, I'm going to keep creating these stories and just know when to deploy it. That's the key.
You think Walz is going to call him a weirdo to his face?
I think he probably will at some point in the debate. Yeah. To be honest, I hope he does because it doesn't really seem to have. I'd be curious what you think, but I don't think there's a downside to him deploying that either because it seems to be working really well.
Yeah, no doubt. I think he is. I think it's going to be a big moment, and if he does it the right way, it's going to be a tough punch. I'm close friends with Tim Ryan, and Tim Ryan, of course, ran against JD Vance, and Vance wins that race by 5 points or so, and the top of the ticket loses by 26 points, which made it very, very difficult for Tim Ryan. But Tim mauled JD Vance in the debate. He was extremely aggressive, held him to account, and I imagine that's how Walz is going to come out of the gate today. He's gonna come out like a football team, very very aggressively in the first minutes after him, trying to rattle JD Vance, who doesn't seem to do very well in these interviews when he's questioned. He gets rattled pretty easy. He contradicts himself pretty often. And so it's going to be an interesting debate. Was one of the people who prepped Dick Cheney back in the day against John Edwards. And that was a vice presidential debate that was devastating in that when you walked out, you were just saying, wow, that's wow, right? One person just clearly won the debate. And that's what I think Walz is going to be going for here tonight. He's gonna, particularly, on a ticket, you have competition, right, between the principals. She crushed Donald Trump in the debate. Now it's his turn. Really after the convention speech, right? The vice presidential candidate has only one more official thing to do, and this is it. And so you want to do really well at it. Dick Cheney prepared for this debate one night for over a year, 5 to 6 hours every Sunday, religiously, of prep, rehearsal, practice, getting ready for this debate. So, Walz certainly didn't have that amount of time and prep. But since he's been selected, if you're going to be the VP nominee, you have this coming, right? This is, it's like a wedding, right? You're going to have the rehearsal dinner, right? You're going to have the ceremony, you're going to have the reception after, and this is part of that. This is part of that process for him. So,
Steve,
I
in your experience, is it considered that there's an asymmetrical risk to the VP debate that if you do well, the upside is smaller? Or is that it seems to me that that would be the case, but I don't know that.
Well, the VP debate has served in some ways as a circuit breaker, right? One of the things that's really unique about this presidential cycle is the total disruption of the fall campaign because of the absence of four debates, three presidential and one vice presidential. So if you go back in that Bush debate, Bush does terrible in the first debate. The VP debate is the second debate. It's like a circuit breaker, right? Because Cheney wins that debate, it calms the waters coming into the rematch And it's like a baseball game, right? It's the best of three. Even in a presidential debate, if it's Romney against Obama and incumbent presidents clearly have an issue when it comes to prepping for the debate because they all do very, very poorly in the first outing. But even in a debate where the presidential candidate completely boots it, it's just like a sporting event where it's a best of three series. They're going to get two more shots. Um, so the vice presidential debate, if it went completely off the rails and it became a distraction for the presidential campaign, meaning for the presidential nominee, I think that's the most you can hope for. Generally speaking, even debates like the Dan Quayle debate, which was one of the most devastating moments, if not the most, in a national debate, where Lloyd Benson looks at him and says, I knew Jack Kennedy. You're no Jack Kennedy. And he looks so mortally wounded by it all. Even that, in the end, is not something that factors in very much in the voting decision as a singular aspect in the choice.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think with Trump, there's another aspect to it, which is Trump doesn't want to be embarrassed by Vance, but he also doesn't want to be outdone or outshined by JD Vance. And so Vance also needs to do well as Trump would see it without doing well in a way that now Trump feels like he's being upstaged because of his ego and the personality driven aspects of how Trump functions. So, needless to say, I don't envy JD Vance's position, although I hope that he does not do well.
You could see the look on Trump's face. I mean, Trump was out there during the convention evaluating everybody.
Yeah.
He was judging them. I mean, he was like the guy from the Muppets, right up in the stage with his clipboard. JD Vance did not please Trump during his convention speech. If you have
Nope.
any understanding of like basic human body language and any registerable emotional intelligence. The weird clapping, the stepping back and the impromptus. So Trump will be judging him. Trump wants to see proverbial blood on the floor, and I think he's unlikely to get it. There's no way Trump is happy with his performance. It's inconceivable that he would. And so, if after this debate, even in the circumstance you're talking about, JD Vance acquits himself pretty well, all of the opposition groups that go out there and say that JD Vance is better than Trump, is the better MAGA leader, that has the ability to destabilize Trump as well in the final 30 days. When Trump is coming into a moment where, if you look at what he said over the weekend, and I want to talk to you about this, the rhetoric is getting very, very dark.
Yeah. And maybe before we move to that, the one other thing I wanted to mention was in the debate, obviously the economy and inflation is going to come up. And JD Vance and Trump have been talking kind of in absolute terms. Gas is expensive, eggs are expensive, groceries are expensive, etc. I'm really curious how Tim Walz will prepare to hit that head on in a way that will make sense to a viewing public that may not follow economics closely, because there's a belief among many that what we need is prices to, quote, go down in absolute terms. And of course, that's quite rare in most Western developed economies and can set off a deflationary spiral. And while the intuitive sense would be prices going down is good, it means I can buy more stuff. When you understand that that means people wait to make purchases because they expect prices to be lower, which slows down the economy, which leads to layoffs. You have to have some way to push back against JD Vance just coming in and talking about inflation, inflation, inflation that actually will resonate with the public and make sense. And I don't know what that would be, but I assume Tim Walz has people around him who will get him ready to deal with that issue in a way that's clear.
There's no question that on the question of the economy, that Tim Walz is the guy on the Democratic side that everybody is hoping can talk to people in a way that relates to them, that they're capable of understanding, that he's a very middle class guy and that he has that connection.
Without a doubt.
No question about that. That he's probably, Tim Walz is a teacher. Is he able to teach basic economics, right? And that's always part of a campaign. Who can teach economics the best? When we think about media, and we think about old media, new media, we think about the success of your show. You look at media story in the news, Hoda leaving the Today Show, um, $20 million contract. The show size has been halved in recent years, choosing to retire. But all of this era of the $20 million salaries, it's all over in media. Word that really was not ubiquitous even a couple of years ago was corporate media. Now everyone talks about corporate media, even replacing the term legacy media. But I want to talk about an aesthetic of media and how you see it that drives me crazy in how things are covered and viewed, and get your thoughts on it. So I'm watching CNN and the Sunday shows, and I'm watching Manu Raju ask Kevin McCarthy or Tom Emmer. I forget which one, but it was Kevin McCarthy and Tom Emmer were both being grilled. And the question was, very predictably, what do you have to say about Trump calling the vice president mentally disabled? Do you agree with that? And when I step back from it, of course they agree with it. They support him fully. They supported him through an insurrection. They agree with everything he says and does. And if they didn't, they wouldn't be sitting there on Sunday morning as they have been, not just in 24, but in 2023, 2022, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, and 16. And so my question is, coming into this final month, we have a corporate media, if you will, that treats each day as an episodic event in a television series, as if what happens today is disconnected completely from what's going to happen tomorrow and what happened yesterday and the day before and the day before. So when I watch Tom Emmer or I watch Kevin McCarthy and they're asked a question, and the question is, are you going to rebuke them for saying this? And the answer is always going to be no, they won't. And they'll squirm, they'll do whatever. The coming question is who won the election? And we're about 35 days out. I hate making predictions, but I'm going to make one. I think that the race is going to break in Harris's direction, right, in the next 20 days or so. And that on election night, we're going to have a pretty clear picture of who's going to win the election by midnight. I don't think it will be a late night. That's how it feels to me. I could be wrong. Later in October than today, I said that Hillary Clinton looked like she was trending to 400 electoral votes. And in that moment, she was. That being said, Harris, except for one thing, and we'll talk about that, seems to me to be on a good trajectory. So envisioning that, which seems to me much more likely than the moment that we remember from 2016, and I was on set for it. I think that it's more likely that she wins the race. And in that instant, you'll start with a conspiracy of lies. And in advance, you know all of the people who will be involved in it. because they're all the people on it, all the people who have been involved in it, who are asked every week whether they'll disavow this or that that Trump did or said, up to and including the overthrow of the government, and the answer never changes. Do you get frustrated when you watch that, when you see that, when you see the tediousness of the questioning in the corporate media about events that at this point have the rhythmic quality of the rising of the sun in the east every in the morning? I mean, how do you see and process all of that?
I do share the frustration. I just am less convinced. You started by saying, of course they don't disavow it because of course they agree with it. I actually think it's worse. I think it's, of course they don't disavow it because even though they obviously personally disagree with it in many cases, they've decided that in their public facing characters, they will not wrong or cross Donald Trump. So I think it's worse. Like, on one hand, it's people who have been convinced by Trump and love all of it, including she's mentally disabled. So, of course, they don't disavow it. Concurrent with that, you have this guy's despicable and terrible. He's lost everything or forced us to underperform everywhere since 2018. But for as long as he controls the Republican Party, even if I'm part of why he controls it, I am not going to publicly cross him. So I actually don't believe that McCarthy and Tom Emmer, you mentioned also Lindsey Graham was interviewed about the same thing. And he said, well, I prefer to talk about issues, weakest response you could have. I actually think they don't agree with it, but they realize until he doesn't, he has control of the Republican Party. And if they don't want to be on the outs with Democrats and on the outs with Trump, they kind of have to just go along with it. Now, I want to say one other thing about the election night scenario you mentioned. I do think the most likely scenario is a modest win by Kamala Harris when it comes to the Electoral College, but one that will be pretty clear by midnight Eastern or at the latest by that morning. I do think that's the most likely scenario. I do think that the people immediately around Trump will do exactly what you said, which is they'll come to defend him with their irregularities and all of the different stuff. But I do think it's becoming increasingly clear to most Republicans that if Trump doesn't win, it's over for him. I know there's debate. Will he run again in 2028? Will he not run again if he loses? I don't think he's running again. And I think it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy where by the early morning of November 6th, every sane Republican, define sane however you want, but even these guys who kind of recognize the damage that Trump has done to the party, I think they'll realize that Trump has lost the power and they will start abandoning him. They won't denounce him, but I think that by the end of November 6th, if Trump loses, you are going to have a large cadre of Republicans. They won't be praising Kamala Harris, but they're going to be ready for a completely non-Trump midterm and certainly 2028. I think it's over for Trump if he loses. He'll say he won. Some people will try to push some kind of scheme, but I think Republicans will start dropping within 12 hours of the election results.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. I totally see how that scenario plays out. That it's like pushing a car uphill and all of a sudden the momentum is over, forward progress is done, and it's just going to start rolling back down the hill, right? It's just, it's not going to go up one more inch. But I'm going to come back to that. So I was on Scripps Morning Rush a month or so ago, and the subject came up about Trump in 2028. And so I'm with you because I like to view myself as a sane person, right? So of course, right, the idea that he would run again. There's only been one person in all of American history who's ever been a four-time nominee, FDR. Trump is one of three that's done it, including him, right? That's done it three times. But when I was on television and I answered the question, is everybody going to go to Mar-a-Lago seeking his support? And the answer is going to be yes. will he be restrained enough to say, I don't know? We'll have to wait and see. Because he doesn't have to run for president. He just has to freeze the race with a wait and see. And my question about Trump 28, imagining a loss and stipulating to how completely insane it sounds, is if you could get to Trump 2024, right? If by 2024, this election we're in, if he didn't cross the line between 20 and 24 of no return, meaning that if he didn't do things by the time we get to this year that inhibit your ability to support him, or more precisely, to say no to him, like, no, you shouldn't run again, then what's going to happen that's different this time than what happened last time with regard to someone like Lindsey Graham, who I spent a year of my life with traveling around America on a presidential, campaign airplane. I think it's the great question, right? How the fever breaks, because, and I write about this obviously, and I talk about it all the time, but you just said it perfectly on a couple minutes ago. None of these people believe, right, that Kamala Harris is mentally disabled, but none of them will repudiate it because they're cynics. And so what you have with Trump in this coalition is a coalition of believers and cynics, true believers, right, true MAGA fanatics, and people that think those people are crazy, but nevertheless, are all sitting around the table with each other trying to get political power in the country. So I think it's the great question at hand, is what happens to Trump, right? Where does he go? What does he do? In the aftermath of this, if you prove to be right, and I'm with you, I think that more likely than not that's what's going to happen, right? There'll be an exhaustion that sets in, but then again, maybe not, because his hold on them has been pretty strong. And the reality is, it's like an avalanche, right? It's like if enough momentum gets downhill, right, it's people get on board with this craziness. If it stalls out at all early, right, you may have a break in the avalanche. I don't know.
I think the question about the fever breaking is reasonable. And if you kind of step back, it's not unreasonable to say, well, hold on. He lost 2020 and said, we're going to take it back, and held the party in limbo, and then said, I am running. And he still had the vast majority of the support, and they're not abandoning him. Why wouldn't the exact same scenario play out over the next 4 years that did the last 4 years? But I think there are differences. One is, in 2020, there were more people than I expect there will be this time who went with it was stolen and we need lawsuits and we need this and that. Trump will try it, but with the experience that it failed in 2020, I think he's going to get less momentum with that. That'll be one difference. Number two, there's a difference between a two-time loser and a one-time loser, which maybe he didn't even really lose. It's going to start feeling different. It's going to be an accumulation. And then Trump will also, he'd be 82 at the time of the next one. And I think in the same way that many people felt that Joe Biden is too old to do 4 more years, you'll have a slice that thinks the same about Trump. So I just don't believe the momentum will get going on November 6th the way it did in 2020, despite anything Trump can do or say.
What do you think that Harris has to do to close this out and put this away?
I mean, to a degree, it's like it seems if she doesn't make mistakes, she'll have a narrow electoral victory. I don't know if I look at it quantitatively first, it's like it's looking like Trump might be able to flip Arizona and Georgia, but also maybe not. And even if he does, he still loses. So in a sense, it's almost like if nothing changes and no major mistake takes place, she probably wins with between 278 and 306, which I believe, I don't remember if it's 303 or 306, which is what it would be this year if she had the same states. And I know there's been a slight realignment of the electoral votes, but it seems the most likely outcome is a Harris victory with between 278 and the low threes, with a couple states maybe flipping. So that's my instinct, which is I don't think she really needs to do anything other than keep doing rallies with the crowd sizes that she's getting. Don't make any major mistakes. But I also am not so naive as to think that nothing will happen over the next 30 days that will require something of her that will be a departure from what she's been doing. So, and I just don't know what that is yet.
I think that the Haitians eating Pat story is of monumental importance because if I can convince anybody that that's true, I can convince them of anything. Right? That's a lie of authority. It's also, while ludicrous, and I certainly laughed out loud. And if someone was recording me, I don't know what my facial reaction would have been. But I Kamala Harris spoke for the world, right? For the country, when she encountered it. That being said, it is a malicious, racist lie as absolutely vicious as anything that came out of the mouth of a striker or a Goebbels. It is dehumanizing. Uh, he would not have been talking about Scandinavians like this. The picture is hordes of tribal blacks descending on this white town of Springfield, Ohio, and snatching the golden retrievers out of the backyard for some voodoo ceremony, eating them. And he won't stop. When he finds out the hospitals are locked down, that the schools are locked down, he won't stop. He's doubling down. He is repeatedly talking about locking up political opponents, shutting down media organizations, revenge, violence, uh, prepping the country for the election is going to get stolen. And so I've analogized many times the race to a river, and the current only takes the water in one direction. So there's never, ever going back. And I started a couple of weeks ago talking about how incendiary, how crazy, how the rhetoric is going to increase. And it's increased in that direction substantially in the last 2 weeks. October is here. What do you see ahead? I have a lot of worry about this month. That is going to be a chaotic month in American life and American politics.
I think it almost certainly will be. And there's this idea of going and I'm looking for a different word than intimidating, but I think intimidating is right on the basis of the way people looking to challenge or question people's legal voting status. This guy Brian Glenn, who used to be on Right Side Broadcasting and he's moved on somewhere else. I think he's dating Marjorie Taylor Greene. He told his audience, go to the polling places, and if you see something that looks out of place, if you see someone that you don't think maybe is there legally, it's obvious what we're talking about, right? It's not a white grandmother. That's not the image of someone that looks like they're out of place that Brian Glenn and his ilk are pointing to. He's saying do what you can. Get an observer involved or call the police or whatever the case may be. Trump has been talking about police at polling places in order to monitor and all of this. I'm so concerned about it that it's borderline where I'm wondering whether it will affect turnout, although I'm not yet over the line into thinking that it will, but it will certainly cause chaos.
Does Kamala Harris need to turn and face Trump and talk to the country and talk about the fear directly and the stakes in a way that's more vivid than she's done it so far?
My biased view is that I would like to see her do that, but I always try to consider someone who doesn't work in this field, but is, working in Michigan and dealing with a student loan and making sure they pick up their kids, but also being on time to work. And is the economic message really the single and sole message here that is going to be the most motivating? Or will, because where I hesitate, Steve, is that if you watch your average Harris rally right now and your average Trump rally, there's a positive vision coming from Harris and a dark apocalyptic vision coming from Trump. Now, you can say it's kind of standard when Harris is, in a sense, the incumbent. She wants to argue things are good and will continue being good. It's natural that she would have a positive vision. Whereas on the other hand, Trump is trying to argue things are so bad, you need to elect me. But I think it goes beyond that. I think that there's actually more to it. And I've said when I watch these competing rallies, sometimes back to back, it doesn't seem to me that the apocalyptic dark vision from Trump with the lurid stories, and he had a 30-second rant about Wisconsin over the weekend that sounds like he's describing. I don't know what he's describing. I don't want to ascribe it to any particular country, but certainly not Milwaukee, right? When you listen to it, you go, that doesn't sound like Milwaukee to me. Because I question whether Trump doing it helps him convert anybody. I just don't know if Harris is better off sticking with the economic message rather than the here's what you really should be afraid of message, other than when it comes to women's bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, which does seem to have been really effective at telling people what the stakes are.
Do you have a sense with the women in your lives, with the women in your life and the women around you about their motivation to go and vote and their reaction to Trump saying, the women are never going to be happier. It's going to be beautiful, right? The states have it. Don't worry about it, right? There's going to be in all the Trumpian bombast around this issue because people. I honestly don't know what to say. I don't conceivably know what I could say to a woman in America to urge them to, participate and vote and stand up, that adds any weight beyond the weight of the evidence around what's happening in the country, which is shocking to behold, at many levels. But fired up, are they worried? Are they scared? Or more women for Trump than you are surprised about? What's anecdotally?
Anecdotally, I am maybe the wrong guy to ask because I know mostly women in blue states who are on the left. And so there's two elements to that are important. One is they weren't voting for Trump anyway, even before all of this craziness with IVF. And he's very big on fertilization and all of this stuff that makes no sense. So they weren't voting for him anyway. But also, most of the women I'm talking to have a confidence. We can discuss whether it's appropriate or not, that because they live in blue states, I talk to my friends in New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts, and they go, this stuff is nuts, but I'm so confident that we're going to be fine in this state. I feel bad for the women in fill in the blanks, right? And so I think that the people I'm speaking to directly are kind of in that camp, which is privileged in the sense of the stakes feel lower on a lot of these issues in the states that have an HDI equivalent to Norway, right? Like Connecticut and Massachusetts, it's a different situation than it is in Mississippi, for example. Now, one other thing, I saw the Good Liars who do these interviews at Trump rallies. They're really good. They interviewed a woman recently who said it was what about such and such, who said they're not even sure women should have the right to vote. At this point, I don't even remember who said it, but recently somebody in Trump's orbit suggested, I don't even know that it's that good that women vote. The woman said, if the country's taken care of, I don't care if I have the right to vote. And it was this incredible moment where it's that's hook, line, and sinker. These are the saviors, and my role, whether I vote or I don't vote, they're going to tell me what my role is, and it's not for me to evaluate this is good or bad or scary or whatever the case may be. And that's so different from everybody I talk to personally, that what influences the people I know personally and what would impact that woman who said, take away my right to vote, as long as we've got Trump instead of Harris, we're going to be okay. It's hard to imagine the same campaign motivating all of those voters because their priorities seem so different.
Perfectly said. It is a wild time. And I think it goes without saying that 10 years into this, and it's 10 years, three election cycles, it feels like it's coming to its end, to me. And it feels like that we're going to be closing the door on a generation of political leaders, many of whom are still around in their 80s, but we're going to see a lot of change in the immediate future. And we're at a moment where I think that the country is either going to pick more of craziness at an epic level or make ready for generational change. And if past is prologue, we're going to have generational change. We're going to take the exit off of this. Off of
Yeah, and there seems to be an accelerationism that, I've spoken over the last however many years on my show how I'm not an accelerationist leftist who believes that we need to dismantle the system to rebuild it better off. As a social democrat, which is a form of regulated capitalism, I don't want to dismantle because I know how many people get hurt in the dismantling. I just want to keep making improvements in the way that sort of Ted Kennedy said, let's keep making improvements in the right direction rather than the wrong. I think what a slice of those that are part of MAGA right now are starting to lean towards is the accelerationism. It's if, they stole it from us in 2020, if they do it again, the threshold of what I'm willing to personally do changes. My hope is that the air will be let out of it, especially if Republican officials in the aftermath of a Trump loss say, we're moving on. I'm not jumping on the it was stolen bandwagon this time. So I hope it will be tempered by that. But anecdotally, I do see, including the people that my correspondents talk to at rallies, sort of a willingness to adopt some of that accelerationism by the right about if they're going to steal it from them twice, we're now willing to do a lot more.
It's also being said in the fervor of the rally with the
Yes.
contagion of the crowd when everyone's home staring at their phones, right? And it's cold outside. We'll see we'll see where the fervor goes if the fever breaks. And until then, I think we're going to have a very, very dramatic month in American politics, which is going to have a lot of twists and turns and wild days ahead in a race that, though she is winning, is not yet over. It is not yet settled. And it is not impossible for him to win. It's not even improbable for him to be able to win the election. But again, I think it will break in her direction in the next couple of weeks as the American people make their final decision. And I think cancel a show that has gotten pretty boring.
The show has jumped the shark, I think we can say.
And that is a perfect place to end it with David Pakman of the David Pakman Show. I urge you to subscribe to watch it. One of the great things about this era of transformation in the media is the creation of great new stars and great new shows and great new sources of information. David Pakman is certainly one of them. David, really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with the Warning audience today. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.